Welcome back to the fourth episode of our podcast, and it's me, Ayush.
And me, Donovan, still.
And today's topic, we'll discuss that a little bit later, but we wanted to introduce a special guest. Donovan, do you want to bring him in?
Yeah, hop on the Zoom. Whoa, what a surprise. It's an in-person guest.
Whoa, okay. So
we're in the same household together, so we're not violating any rules here. So
I don't know about that. Well, as you guys probably don't know, that's Kris, Donovan's brother. Do you want to introduce yourself a little bit, Kris?
I'm Kris with a K, and yeah, I'm Donovan's older brother. Graduated from University of Minnesota back in 2018 with an environmental science degree. Did AmeriCorps for a year. Now I'm back home working. So
yeah, when we're really going to use his environmental science expertise for today's topic.
Sure we are. Well, I think a good way to start us off is to ask you guys questions about each other and how well you know each other, because even though you live in the same household, I know plenty of siblings that know absolutely nothing about each other. And it's quite surprising. For example, Daniel Zhang knows absolutely nothing about his sister.
But, Daniel Zhang has a sister?
Yeah, he has an older sister who just graduated from UMKC. Yeah. Well, Donovan, let's start off with you. What is Kris's favorite video game character? Or Super Smash character, if that might help narrow it down.
Okay. Super Smash, you should know. I've had the same main since Brawl. Not Brawl, since Melee. I guess we haven't played together that often.
It's been a while.
I was just playing it.
I just want to let you know that I can help you eliminate one. It's not going to be Wii Fit Trainer. That is a new character.
Thank you. I'm guessing Ganondorf?
Ganondorf was one of my favorites, but Samus is my main almost every time because I really like to just hide in the corner and take pot shots and never engage in actual combat. That's pretty much my strategy.
Okay. I know Rosalina super broken in Smash, and so I know Peach is also really broken, and Meta Knight is just fun to spam. Well, Kris, what is Donovan's favorite TV show and maybe even character, if you know that?
Favorite TV show? Well, I mean, I don't know if he just watched this Korean drama he really liked, but I don't know if that's his favorite TV show of all time. Wait, is it Adventure Time? Is it Finn from Adventure Time or Jake from Adventure
Time? That's the favorite show. You got that, but no,
it's not the character. Yeah, what about BMO?
It's BMO. Yeah,
the little Game Boy guy. Yeah.
Oh my God, I thought it might be like Marceline or something. I don't know. You seem like you could be a Marceline fan.
I'm not sure what to make of that, but thanks.
Like going through a goth phase, who knows? And I think this is going to be the final question. Second to final question. But Donovan, what is Kris's most hated sport?
Most hated sport.
Yeah. This is really challenging what you guys know about each other.
I guess there's probably an obvious one. It's not really hate, but it's the one I like the least. I mean, it's something I sometimes don't even call a sport, though I understand it takes skill and it's difficult to do.
Golf?
No, not golf. It's really boring to watch.
So golf.
No, I mean golf has some like drama to it. And each individual shot can be like, oh damn, that's a nice shot. But let's just say this one is very repetitive. Very loud.
A loud sport.
Very loud. One of the loudest sports you can have, really.
I feel like
you should know what that would be.
Every sport.
No. This is way louder than any other sport.
Do you mean like shooting?
No. Like, and I'm not talking about like fans. The fans are not making the noise. I'm just saying the sport itself is loud.
Drumming. Like what?
No,
I don't know.
NASCAR.
Okay,
I was just so.
that as a sport. Okay, you just completely.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, people consider it a sport, but I mean, I don't really. It's just, yeah, NASCAR racing is
Yeah.
is not my favorite.
Interesting. I don't know if I would consider that a sport. I feel that's like so nuanced.
It's on ESPN, so I mean, if we're just letting ESPN decide these things for us, I mean, Disney already controls everything. Why not what we call sports?
All right. And then I think, Kris, this is going to be the final question, and this might be a good segue into our topic. But what do you think, or what events do you think Donovan did in his time in debate?
What events?
Yeah.
I mean, he did. I mean, I think he did a little bit of Congress, right? That's one of them. He did Puff, right, mainly, and I'm assuming you at least did a little bit of Lincoln Douglas, or no?
No.
No, Lincoln Douglas. He particularly dislikes to judge Lincoln Douglas. And I mean, I should never judge debate anymore either. But
he gave a couple of people 15s.
You know what? They had a perfectly adequate debate processing, and I gave them. No one told me what the scores really meant. They're just like 30s if they're amazing, and 0s like if they literally offend me. So
yeah, you're typically supposed to actually rate people like 25 to 30 or like 20 to 30.
Right, well, someone get on Miss Beck to write a little bit better instructions, I guess.
Well, we'll send this podcast directly to her.
I mean, to be fair, I've been tempted to rate people like 5s just for being bad speakers. Just for not like thinking logically, if you feel like they're just completely wilding, saying low-key racist stuff. That's happened before.
There is, I mean, one of those guys in the last one I was judging, he was trying to argue about the United States as a government for Americans needs to prioritize American needs before they then thinking about the needs of the wider world, which is fair when you're thinking about like government structure and government philosophy. But instead of trying to say that, he was like, it just comes down, it's us versus them, it just comes down to that. And I was like, all right.
All right. Well, Donovan, do you want to tell us about the other events that you did?
So, I did do Puff and Congress. Those are the main ones. But in addition, at a couple of tournaments, I did an event called Radio, where you have to make, I forget how long it is, but you have to make pretend like you're a news person on the radio, and you give a speech about international news, national news, and local news. So at a tournament around this time of year, 2 years ago during my senior year, one of the main countries I talked about for my international news segment was Ethiopia.
I see where we're going now.
Yeah. So in case you missed it, that's what we're going to be talking about today.
Wait, in case you missed it, isn't that the name of the podcast?
Yeah.
Oh, that's the whole. All right, I got
you. So in that radio, the big thing I was talking about is that how the new Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed had just appointed a woman known for being a fighter for equal rights for women and other minorities in Ethiopia to the Supreme Court to be their first female chief justice of the Ethiopian Supreme Court. And I said that represents, a good sign of progress for the country of Ethiopia, and that I was wishing the new Supreme Court Justice, Miaza Ashanafi, as well as the Prime Minister who appointed her, Abiy Ahmed, the best of luck. Luck probably could have been a little better for Ahmed when we look at where Ethiopia is now.
Yeah, but what about for the Supreme Court Justice? How's she doing?
She is doing pretty well. She's helped to implement, in addition to the normal role, actually, of being a Supreme Court Justice and deciding cases, she also has an administrative role in trying to train and educate new judges. Because they're still a developing country and they're still formalizing some of their modern legal system. So they still have to take steps to increase legitimacy, of the courts at every level. So for her, as far as I can tell, she's doing pretty well. But Ethiopia on a larger scale is definitely seeing some struggles. Have you been keeping up with that news story at all, Kris?
I mean, yeah. I mean, I've kept abreast of the situation a little bit. I'm sorry, can I say that on the podcast? But no, yeah, I know a little bit about what's going on there. I haven't looked at it, any of the more recent developments, but I know the basic situation a little bit, I think. So.
Well, then you want to describe a little bit about the situation?
Oh, all right.
Putting you on the spot.
So, while before the current prime minister, came to power, the ruling party of Ethiopia was based out of the Tigray region, right? That's correct. And it was kind of a, the government system there kind of split along ethnic boundaries. So, here in America, we have the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, and they're not technically based around any ethnic lines, though we have seen that in voting blocks. It has happened, but in Ethiopia, to my understanding, each of the different major party blocks, at least before the current prime minister, was based around one ethnic group would have their party that kind of argued for their region of the country. As from my understanding, the regions are pretty they're not very mixed with the different ethnicities, except for the capital region. Yeah. But anyway, when the current prime minister came to power, he tried to introduce a more non-ethnic based governance to the country. And the people who had been in charge, the people, I don't know if they're called Tigrans or anything like that. I don't know the ethnic name, but the people who are based out of Tigray, weren't particularly happy about that. And they still have strong control in the state, province. I don't know their administrative system. I don't know if they're federal or unitary. I'm assuming they're unitary.
They are federal.
They are federal. Okay. So they have a strong federal state, not as U.S. theoretically strong federal state, and the fact that we have strong institutions. No, one of their states is more powerful than the others, I suppose, because that's where the Tigray power structure is from. And I'm not quite sure what happened to I think a government building was attacked in some way. I don't really remember exactly what happened to start the conflict, but essentially, according to the story, some type of Tigray rebellion or act against the government that they no longer had full control over occurred in their province, and in retaliation, the Ethiopian military started having operations and essentially invaded their own state, and then locked down all internet connection and different ways of communicating in the area. So we have even if Ethiopia's actions, which I don't know exactly what they're doing, say they're doing just a justified invade anything like that, we don't know. We have no way of really knowing, because they've done something kind of shady, which is shut down the communication, which I know that there's a military reason to do that, but it's also just makes everything harder to really piece together what's happening. And I know that in that area there has been reports of some human rights abuses. A massacre occurred, according to I think the Ethiopian government. It was from the Tigray rebels. I don't know if the Tigray leadership have released any type of statement. I don't know if they can. I don't know what type of communication capabilities they have outside of the just government system. So I don't know if they've had any way to release a statement about that, blaming the other side, which you assume they would do if they have done it, or even if especially if they haven't done it, they would still say the other side did it. So, and without good observation or really easy way to communicate with the actual people there, it's hard to tell which side is correct. So, and I know that there are fears that this will break down and destabilize just the whole area, and fighting could break into neighboring countries, or Eritrea might become involved because it's in that area of the country. It's bordering Eritrea, or it's that yeah. So Eritrea, which they just stopped having a war there, so people are worried that this could spill out and destabilize a country people had thought was really on a good track.
That's a pretty comprehensive
Sorry,
rundown.
I don't know what you wanted from me.
No, that was kind of just a quiz to see how much you knew. Some pronunciation issues, but
I've only read about it. I haven't heard anything about it, so
yeah. Do you have anything to add off the bat there, Ayush?
I mean, one thing is for sure, it's not Tigrans, it's Tigrayans, Mayans kind of thing is Tigrayans.
Okay.
Yeah, it's Tigrayans. That's where we're gonna go with.
Tigray.
It's spelled in that way, and that's how I'm assuming it's pronounced as well. But that's just the one I guess calling people from that region. But you mentioned how you weren't fully sure how the conflict started. And you mentioned a government building. It was actually a military base in Tigray, in the northern part of Ethiopia, that was blown up. which led to the escalation of tensions. But it also started a little bit before that, when the presidential election was supposed to take place this year, but the prime minister of Ethiopia, Abiy, was like unwilling to make the elections happen this year and was trying to push it off until next year because of COVID scares and like COVID related issues. And the people of Tigray weren't really thrilled about that. So they went against his like wishes, held the elections anyway, and the prime minister was unwilling to recognize the elections that took place in September because he felt like not everyone got to vote and it was just illegitimate. So that created a lot of tensions, and it eventually broke out when Tigray did attack the building, and then the prime minister sent in soldiers. They started to like engage in conflict. And yeah, there have been like numerous human rights violations, civilian massacres. And you mentioned how like the communication has been like down because of the internet not being there. And because of that, a lot of the human rights atrocities that are occurring aren't being able to be reported by the government of Tigray because they just don't have a way to keep count of people who are dying and report it out to report it out internationally. So it's a very, very complicated situation. And I think the prime minister has a very big role to play here because in 2018, when he took power, he really started negotiating a peace deal with Eritrea because they were in like a conflict with Ethiopia because Eritrea used to be part of Ethiopia, and then they had like a civil war, they had independence, and they have been like sworn enemies. So in 2019, after like resolving a lot of situations there, the prime minister was given a Nobel Peace Prize for his efforts. But this year, with his unwillingness to back down and create military intervention in the region, I think it really shows that like the drastic difference that even though he is a man of peace, he is also willing to crack down very hard on the protests and the backlash that is happening in his country.
Yeah, I think if you look at Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's life, what you really see is that he's in many ways a man of contradictions, because he often markets himself as a peacemaker and a peacekeeper, and part of that is because he was literally a UN peacekeeper, and he served in Rwanda and the aftermath of the genocide to try to keep the peace and stop that from continuing. And when he gave his Nobel Peace Prize acceptance speech, he talked about how important that experience was for him, and making him realize that like you can't allow intolerance and you have to try to unite people. At the same time, after being a peacekeeper, he then continued to be in the Ethiopian military and had a role in their war against Eritrea. And then if you go back before that, you see that his mother is from the Amara ethnic group. His father is an Oromo. His mother is Christian. His father was a Muslim. So he really is right at the divide of some of the ethnic divisions in Ethiopia too. And then, flash forward to when he comes to power, and he makes a peace deal. He starts freeing political prisoners who had been taken under the previous administration. But then when protests and start to get out of hand following certain deaths of other popular political figures, which some people think that the people from Tigray and their prior government may have actually orchestrated some of those. But when protests in response to those started to get out of hand, you saw Abiy, cut down or, what's the word I'm looking for? I guess come down pretty harshly on those too, because this conflict in the Tigray right now is not the first time he's actually closed off internet access for people. And then once again, you have the decision to postpone the elections. And there is a really legitimate reason for that, in that Ethiopia does not have the same infrastructure to try to hold an election in the pandemic like a country like the United States has. But then there is, some people could be legitimately concerned on, is he trying to postpone elections because he thinks it's politically advantageous to do so? And there isn't much evidence that was his reasoning, but it is a concern that, has at least some level of plausibility for the government of Tigray to protest.
Yeah, and I mean, there's historical precedent that someone trying, delaying an election, after promising that we're going to change this country into democracy as some type of transitional government, a lot of they'll say, oh, we can't do the elections yet. So there is some precedent that could make people afraid, whether or not, that's just general precedent, though, not for this person.
Yeah, but there is also precedent specific to the country. Because after their monarchy was overthrown, which had survived European invasions, Ottoman invasions for hundreds and hundreds of years, a dictatorship was formed, and they initially planned to and stated they would establish some sort of democracy, but it never happened. And that's actually when that dictatorship was overthrown, was when the Tigray People's Liberation Front, overthrew that group, created the new sort of ethno-federalist system that Ethiopia has today, where the different ethnic groups each have their own state. But then they took control of the federal government for themselves, and sort of funneled some of the federal wealth into their region. And so that's one of the big reasons, in addition to, the desire for local control that people have across the ethnic groups and ethnic feuds that are happening in Ethiopia. Another big source of this conflict is really economic, because Tigray had been receiving benefits from the fact that they had been controlling the federal government. And, for people in a position of power, moves towards equality are going to be, not to their advantage.
Yeah, I mean, 100%.
When the prime minister came to
Sorry.
When the prime minister came to power, did he win an election? Is that how he became prime minister? How did it? Okay, so what changed that allowed him to run and win? If the Tigray party had been kind of controlling the federal government for so long, so were they having legitimate elections and just like no one had been running that could garner, enough support? Or
I mean, a brief way to explain it is basically they weren't having proper elections because Tigray basically had been controlling the federal government for so long that they had accumulated a great deal of power and control within the government. But eventually the people of Ethiopia got so fed up that they started to demand change. And that's where the prime minister stepped in and started all this change in the region, because this basically a few weeks after the prime minister was elected, a lot of the unrest in the region created by all the ethnic divides by the Tigray started to calm down because of his election. And even though he really didn't do a lot at the very beginning, there was just a lot of calmness. And then within that year, he started picking up, starting negotiating treaties with Eritrea and peace deals. And that's why he earned that Nobel Peace Prize in the first place.
So a lot Ethiopia, they had been counting the votes, and people were allowed to run, but they were running in a repressive environment where there was a risk of, being arrested as a political prisoner. Mm-hmm. And then also, Abai actually, so the Tigrays, the people from Tigray, is the easiest way to say it, I guess. They created this federalist system, but because they had allies from other ethnic groups, where essentially the agreement was, we'll run the federal government, but that's fine because you still control your state and our federal powers are limited. Mm. So they had allies in the local party groups. So the current prime minister was actually a member of the government. Mm. He just was able to unite the allied members of the coalition to then basically in a surprise vote run against the heads of it and take power for the lower level alliance parties. Mm. And then he started to try to create a new national party that would no longer be limited to the various ethnic based coalitions that had existed before. But that kind of gets us, some of the recent history of Ethiopia. The ancient history of Ethiopia, also very fascinating, but we're not going to be getting too much into that on this one. But now that we kind of know like the conflict that's happening and some of the reasons for it, Ayush, do you have any opinions or have you read anything about like where you think Ethiopia is heading now and what effects this conflict is going to have?
I mean, just adding a little bit onto the crackdown that the prime minister has taken more recently, he has basically stopped all federal funding to the area, which incited even more violence in the region. And even though the UN has called for a ceasefire, it's been pretty iffy. And that's where like international leaders have been calling on the US, especially to place sanctions on Ethiopia until they sort out this conflict. And I don't know if sanctions are the best tool because the conflict and the pandemic already reduced the growth of Ethiopia from almost 7%, like GDP growth, to 1%. And that was before this conflict. And after this conflict, I'm pretty sure it's going to be in the negatives. And sanctions on top of that, that's going to really destabilize the Horn of Africa because Ethiopia is one of the few developing nations in Africa that has prosperity for its citizens. And I mean, just going forward, something the prime minister has to keep in mind is to not continue his rhetoric of being a peacekeeper, what he learned in like by being a UN peacekeeper, and that like putting down protests and engaging in violence is not necessarily the best way, because even though he might be creating temporary stability, he creates a higher chance of more retaliation in the future from Tigray, that region, but he also creates more likelihood of retaliation from the people of Ethiopia because a lot of Ethiopians have had to flee the country as a result of this violence, going to Eritrea and some to Sudan. And it's been reaching almost 50,000, 100,000 Ethiopians that have now fled the country. And it's wild because eventually Ethiopia is not going to be supporting this prime minister if he continues down this dreaded path.
Yeah, it's also worth noting that Prime Minister Ahmed does have a fair deal of support across the country and regions outside of Tigray, but it's not universal. And so there are definitely some regions in Ethiopia that are saying, they're not doing anything violent in our region yet, but they might in the future. So Ahmed has had a mixed legacy up to this point. He won a Nobel Peace Prize, but is currently engaged in a conflict. And depending on how he and the government he leads will really shape his legacy and the legacy of Ethiopia for a long time, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And then, Kris, do you have any final thoughts on what you would recommend as the future government or advice to the future government of Ethiopia?
Well, I guess what Donovan just said about, these other, states that, support the federal government right now, they might kind of have this feeling like, okay, we weren't doing the best with, the Tigray controlling the federal government, but at least they were pretty, okay with letting us do what we wanted, essentially, I guess is kind of like the deal they had a little bit. So, seeing the federal government invade one of the states probably makes them take a step back and be like, oh, wow, that could happen to us. Obviously it's a little difficult because, there could be a legitimate reason to have some level of conflict. There can be a reason to have conflict. And, while you usually want to make sure military interventions are, your last try, the last thing you're going to do, but, it's not always necessarily like, oh man, like he did it, engaged in military conflict. It's, it's really, how are they going about it? Is there a clear goal? Is it not, shouldn't be punitive. It should be, for, correct reasons. Obviously the blackout makes things a little bit, it just makes everything hard to see. And it's kind of, you can't just avoid doing, what's it called? It's like the, it's an ethics rules in, just the thought of impropriety, like you can't just not do something wrong. You have to make it sure it doesn't look like you're doing something wrong. So, an example would be, Matt Kemp running for governor of Georgia while still being Secretary of State. Even if he did, even if for whatever, he did not, I don't know, but even if he did absolutely nothing wrong, didn't abuse the Secretary of State position at all to become governor, it creates an appearance of possible issues that he may have. So just having that appearance delegitimizes things because people will become doubtful, even if he did nothing wrong. So I think one of the first things he needs to do, if he wants to, show like, okay, this is like a small scale, like this is a military intervention to prevent violence, and the Ethiopian military is not committing these crimes, then what he needs to do is open up the communication to the people of Tigray, and he needs to let people in to see what is going on. Because transparency, if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to hide. And again, obviously you want to limit communication because if you're in an armed conflict, you don't want them to have ease of communication. But, at the end of the day, I think from Ethiopians, the rest of the country to feel like he's not doing something wrong, and for the international community to feel like he's not doing something wrong, we need that visibility. We need that transparency. And I don't know what the right way forward is, because I don't think his government should stop federal funding. I think withholding money and creating even worse economic problems is not the way to stabilize an area that is not happy. I don't know exactly what the elections were. So they were having their own local elections that he tried to overturn, or were like also electing people to, the National Congress and things like that, or casting votes for prime minister, or
it was local elections.
Just local elections
they conducted unilaterally.
So he was, and I don't know, like if you're a federal state, then why can't they have their own federal local elections on their own schedule? I mean, I guess I don't know. I just don't know if he should have been so off the hand, like, no, we're not accepting those if they were the local elections. And, obviously I don't know their election laws, so I don't know what type of power the federal government has constitutionally to set the dates of elections. So, I would have to really know more about that to see about the cause of this, the initial, throwing out of those election results, to see if that was a good idea at all. But I don't know. I mean, going forward, we need the transparency. We need people in there that aren't involved, third parties to investigate these human rights abuses. We need him to go back to the peaceful rhetoric and say, we're doing this for a reason. We're not just attacking you because we don't like you. There were some problems we were having, and we're going to take a step back, and we've shown that we're willing to go to conflict. So that helps their negotiating power somehow. Whether or not we should use that as negotiating power, I don't know. But take a step back. So we've gone into conflict, but we don't want to stay in conflict with you. So take a step back, do a ceasefire, try to negotiate. I think, and see where we can get. Obviously, it's hard to imagine in our federal state. It'd be really weird for Georgia to, I don't know, go attack a military base in Georgia and then demand things from the government. Obviously, it's a little, it's interesting having a power structure like that where, the states are negotiating like that with the federal government, not through the institution of voting and things like that. So that's, it's something that's harder for, a more developed country to really wrap your heads around. But I mean, that's what they need to do. They need to have discussions. And I mean, it'd be similar, obviously it's different, but it'd just be kind of like if Florida needed, more money from the federal government for a hurricane, their governor, their state senators, they're essentially lobbying the federal government to get more money. So, I mean, it's that type of negotiation, except a little more high stakes right now. But they just need to engage in dialogue, and they need to make it more transparent and go from there, because we just can't know anything without transparency. So we can't know which side or how we feel like this should be resolved until we have more information, and they're not providing us with that information, which only looks bad for them. Even if it's only for that military reason, and they're not really hiding anything, it looks bad. It looks bad. And how you look or how you're viewed is honestly more important than what you actually do. So in many ways, at least on an international relations scale. So
yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, those were some really, really great thoughts to add to the conversation. And I think you're basically qualified to be the next president or prime minister of Ethiopia. You can challenge, you can challenge him. But yeah, I think that was a really great episode. It was nice to have you on, and thank you guys for tuning in.
Thanks for having me,
Kris. And always. We'll make sure to have you on another time because I think this was pretty insightful. What are you doing, Donovan?
I was trying to do the nerd fighters thing, but like I can't split my fingers.
I don't know, don't be throwing up gang signs here.
On that note, thank you guys for tuning in and have a great day.
Happy Hanukkah.
Happy Hanukkah.